time being, it's impossible for me to take my family back to the UK safely. Well,
The palace of Derventhal had weathered fires, sieges, and 3 centuries of whispered betrayals, but nothing in its stone memory had prepared it for the sentence Crown Prince Alaric spoke that morning. It was not shouted. It was not even raised above a conversational tone. And that, more than anything, was what made it unbearable. Alaric had crossed a line that royal houses spend generations trying never to reach. Not a warning, not a private rebuke, but a final, binding decree. In the space of a single breath, Prince Bastian's place in the future of the Derventhal crown was erased, and even King Aldric Sr., a man who had buried 2 wars beneath his composure, could not find a word to say. Alaric entered the Privy Council chamber without asking anyone to rise. He carried no visible anger, and that absence of anger was somehow more frightening than fury would have been. King Aldric sat at the head of the long oak table, still as a man waiting for a blow he already knew was coming. Duchess Rosalind, the king's sister and the keeper of the sealed succession ledger, stood near the far window, watching her nephew with a sorrow she made no effort to hide. A final royal decree, in the law of Derventhal, was a binding command issued by an heir with the king's tacit consent, meant to permanently reshape the line of succession. This one stripped Prince Bastian of every remaining claim, his future title, his advisory seat, his place in the ceremonial order that bound the family to the throne. Succession rights were the threads that tied a royal to the possibility of power. Alaric was cutting his brother free of every last one. King Aldric lifted the parchment slowly, and each line seemed to add weight to his hands as he read. Alaric did not move. He stood with the stillness of a man, carrying the full burden of a brother he had once protected and could no longer shield. Rosalind kept her eyes on her nephew, not with approval, not with triumph, but with the flat, aching recognition that duty had finally walked into the room, carrying a blade. Bastian was not present, but his absence filled every empty chair. His name sat on the page, like an open wound. This was not a reduction of his standing. It was an erasure. A senior chamberlain broke the silence, confirming through a formal council record that the decree had been drafted days earlier, proof that Alaric had crossed this line privately long before he crossed it in public. The emergency succession ledger, the confidential record kept for moments of national crisis, no longer carried Bastian's name at all. The removal was total. Rosalind's expression shifted first. Aldric set the parchment down, but did not sign it immediately. Alaric looked at his father, then at his aunt, and spoke the words that froze the room. "Let me explain why there was no other path." But before he could finish, everyone present understood that this decision was never only about law or protocol. It was about blood, and about the 2 brothers who had once shared the same nursery, the same losses, and the same impossible childhood beneath the palace's watchful towers. Alaric did not look like a man who had won anything. Bastian, though absent, was not spoken of as an enemy, and yet the distance between them had grown so severe that even their father could no longer pretend it was temporary. Alaric had understood, before anyone said it aloud, that he was no longer simply a brother nursing old grief. He was the future king, the man responsible for shielding the monarchy from any fracture that might later break it wide open. That was why Bastian's remaining rights had become more than a family matter. They were the last formal threads connecting him to the machinery of the crown, and his growing distance from royal duty had turned those threads into something Alaric saw as dangerous. If a crisis ever came, a death, an invasion, a vacancy at the throne, the kingdom would need absolute clarity about who could be called upon. Ambiguity, Alaric believed, was itself a kind of threat. King Aldric studied his son as though looking at 2 people at once. The loyal heir who had stayed and shouldered every unbearable expectation without complaint, and the wounded sibling who had been forced into a decision no brother should have to make. The king wanted, more than anything, to protect Bastian, but he also understood that a crown could not be built on uncertainty. Fatherhood pulled him one way. Kingship pulled him another. Between those 2 forces stood Alaric, pale, silent, and terribly certain. Far from the chamber where his future had just been dismantled, Bastian received the message in writing. He read it once, then again, as though a second reading might soften the language. It did not. His hand tightened around the parchment. After years of public arguments, long absences, and a slow unraveling no one had wanted to name aloud, Bastian had never quite believed the final door would actually close. Yet his brother's decree had done what no quarrel ever had. It had made the rupture official. Rosalind had seen this coming long before anyone else was ready to admit it. She had warned, in a private council session preserved in the family's internal records, that delay would only make the eventual reckoning more brutal. A confidential review of royal stability, commissioned quietly the previous winter, had already concluded that Bastian's lingering claim created what the report called a constitutional shadow, a phrase that meant, in plain terms, that his name alone could sow doubt about authority exactly when the kingdom could least afford it. Alaric had resisted that conclusion for as long as he could. He hadn't wanted victory over his brother. He had wanted a reason to stop. But one final incident took that reason away. It was not a public quarrel. It was not an old wound reopened in the press. It happened behind closed doors, during a single ceremony, in one quiet moment that convinced Alaric the line had been crossed for good. To understand why he chose the harshest path available to him, the story must return to what the palace later called the true point of no return, the Dreventhal Remembrance Rite, a private ceremony meant to honor past monarchs and renew the family's spoken loyalty to the future crown. What was supposed to unite the family instead became the final proof that unity was already gone. Alaric entered that ceremony still hoping, against everything, that the family could hold together for one more day. Bastian had been invited under careful conditions. No public statements, no outside commentary, no challenge to royal order during the rite itself. King Aldric had agreed to his younger son's presence because he still wanted to believe there was a narrow path back to dignity for him. Bastian seemed composed at first. He followed the rhythm of the ceremony, listened to the invocations, and said nothing out of place. Then came the final line of the oath, the one binding every family member's loyalty directly to Alaric as future king. Bastian stepped forward and stopped. He did not speak the words. The silence that followed struck harder than any outburst could have. Alaric looked at him, visibly shaken, because this was not a forgotten line or a moment of nerves. It was refusal, offered in full view of the family that had gathered to witness loyalty being renewed. King Aldric lowered his eyes, devastated. He did not correct his son. He did not step in to smooth it over. And that restraint told Alaric something he could not unknow. His brother had not merely stumbled over a phrase. He had rejected the future order the entire ceremony existed to protect. Two senior chamberlains later confirmed, in a formal account, that Bastian's refusal during the remembrance rite was the specific trigger behind the decree that followed. Word of the moment had also, somehow, traveled beyond the palace walls within days. Proof, to Alaric, that even the family's most private rituals were no longer safe from exposure. If a sacred oath could leak beyond a locked door, he reasoned, then nothing involving his brother could remain protected. He requested the emergency succession ledger that same afternoon, not with rage, but with something closer to dread. When the brothers finally faced each other, there were no advisors in the room, no prepared statements, no careful public composure to hide behind. Bastian entered the private sitting room at Dreventhal, already carrying anger in the set of his jaw. Alaric stood near the table, controlled and still, with the decree resting between them like a boundary neither of them could cross without losing something permanently. King Aldric waited just outside, refusing to enter unless his sons asked for him directly. He understood that stepping in too soon would turn a brother's reckoning into a matter of state, and he did not want that. Not yet, not for this. Alaric did not push the document forward. He let Bastian find it on his own, because there could be no more hiding behind distance or delay. This was not a rumor. It was not pressure from the council. It was the final decision, written and waiting. Bastian read the pages, then looked up at his brother, his pain sharpening into something harder. "Are you speaking to me as my brother?" he asked. "Or as the future king?" Alaric's expression changed, because the honest answer was both, and he knew it would hurt either way. He told Bastian that he had spent years trying to keep family grief separate from royal duty, but that Bastian's own choices had made that separation impossible. The crown, Alaric said, could not keep an emergency pathway open for someone who no longer accepted the order that pathway depended on. Bastian's face hardened, but Alaric did not soften what he had come to say. Love, he told his brother, could not be used as a shield against consequence. Reading further into the decree, Bastian understood the full shape of what had happened. It was not only his ceremonial standing that had been stripped away. The public honor royal could still hold even without daily duty. His emergency path back into the line of succession had been closed as well, meaning no future crisis, however severe, could pull him back into consideration. Bastian pushed the parchment back across the table. Alaric did not pick it up. The quiet refusal said more than any argument could have. The moment had moved past anger, past guilt, past whatever brotherhood still lingered beneath both of their titles. But the decree's true strength did not come from that single confrontation. It came from a structure built well before either brother entered the room. Advisors, legal precedent, and family elders who had reached the same conclusion independently and in private. Alaric reviewed the final succession file with a stillness that made the crowned senior legal counselor choose every word with unusual care. Duchess Rosalind sat nearby, the only relative asked to witness the reasoning directly, because she was known throughout the court as someone who valued duty over spectacle. The counselor explained that the decree was not built on emotion. It rested on established precedent, the principle that succession rights must reflect active loyalty and reliability, not blood alone. Rosalind would not let her nephew hide behind calm language. She told him plainly that strength without sorrow curdles into cruelty, and the words landed on him harder than any formal objection could have. Alaric admitted, quietly, that the decision felt like losing his brother all over again, not through headlines this time, but through his own hand, closing the door himself. King Aldrich entered briefly and stood beside the advisory notes, looking older than he had that morning, as though the weight of both sons had finally settled onto him at once. He asked whether there was any path that preserved Bastian's dignity without.